Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sitting through that break. If you are just tuning in for the first time, in our first segment, we talked about some wide receiver markets. We talked about some wide receivers that may or may not get traded, some news surrounding some of the stars. And in our second segment, we just finished our fourth episode of the MLB offseason files, this time covering the Los Angeles Dodgers. But in this segment, we are going to be moving off of those two sports, talking about the NHL trade deadline. The NHL trade deadline that is coming up on us really quickly. The deadline is just about a week from now on March 8th. We're going to do a little preview today. Excuse me. We're going to do a little preview. We're going to talk about some players to watch that might be on the move. We are going to cover some teams that might be major players in there, and some names to watch for the deadline. But before we get too far into this segment, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of this show than you already are, all you need to do is go to streamelements.com/GSMCSportsNetwork./tip. You can leave a tip along with a comment. It'll scroll across the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little conversation. You'll become an even bigger part of the show, not just for me, but for everyone to see. We appreciate you leaving anything or really just watching. Again, that link to leave a tip or donation is streamelements.com/GSMCSportsNetwork./tip. We appreciate anything you can give. But, like I said, let's get right into this segment. As I was doing in my little preview here, we are covering the NHL trade deadline. A little preview of the deadline that's coming up in just about a week from now on March 8th. There's a couple big players, big moves that might be made. There were a bunch of executives that expect, or one NHL agent that says he expects this trade deadline to be insane. Now, on the other hand, there's a team executive that said he doesn't feel like there's a lot out there. You never know. But that's how it is with every trade deadline. It could be crazy, it could be boring, it could pass by with nothing. But there's a couple big players that I'm keeping an eye on personally to see if they're going to make a move. And one that I wanted to start off talking about is the New Jersey Devils. The New Jersey Devils are a team that last season kind of had a breakout year. They kind of were that surprise team. You know how every year in every sport, there's going to be that one surprise team that comes out of nowhere, maybe a year early or a couple years before people expect them to be ready to compete. The Jersey Devils were that team last year. Everything kind of clicked for them, and they made a nice run in the playoffs, all the way to I think the second round, maybe the third round. I don't remember. Honestly, I apologize for that. My NHL history is jumbling through my mind right now. But they won a playoff series or two. So they were looking at being a contender again this season, and it has not gone quite to plan. They are the outside looking in the Eastern Conference. They don't have a more than 50% chance of making the playoffs, and it's because their goaltending has already fallen apart. We talk about a team like the Devils, and this always has been their weakness, their goaltending. They never had this elite goaltending, even last season. They had guys that were doing it. They had guys that were coming across and getting it. They had guys that were getting the job done in Vitek Vanacek, who is going to make the easy saves, but he's not there to make the tough saves. On the other hand, we have teams like the Lightning that won a bunch of cups in a row, and they have these elite goalies. So that's been the main target for the New Jersey Devils, has been a goalie. And a name that me personally, I have been wanting them to go out and get is John Gibson from the Ducks. It's going to take a lot. He is on a huge contract over there, but it's got term. Which he's got, I believe, 3 years left after this season. It is a big contract. There'd have to be a lot given up to get him. But a name that has been circling, other than John Gibson, has been Markstrom. He is the goaltender for the Flames. He has had a pretty solid season. He got injured for a little bit of it. But looking at a guy like him, Jacob Markstrom has, by a lot of numbers, been a lot of high analytics numbers, been the second best goalie in the league behind Connor Hellebuck. You look at a guy who had a down season last year, but the year before that was in Vezina trophies or best goalie conversations. You look at a team in the Flames that's kind of teetering on the edge. We talked about the Raiders being in that mediocrity. They're teetering on the edge. They lost a lot of their stars from when they made that playoff run. So they're teetering on the edge of being a good team and competing or blowing it up. So a lot of this trade deadline kind of hinges on what the Flames are going to do. They have a couple players, not just Markstrom, that might get traded. Tanev and Hanifin, both guys that are on the trade block or the theoretical trade block as well. So we're looking at a trade between the Flames and the Devils for Jacob Markstrom, something that almost happened a couple years ago. It ended up falling through. I believe no one knows exactly what the Flames were asking for, but the belief is that it was too high. What they were asking for was just a little too much, for a little too expensive for the Devils' blood. So they moved on. They didn't end up getting him. But now we look at a team like the Devils that is on that edge, outside looking into the playoffs. They need to make that big move if they think they're going to make the playoffs, because they keep things as they are now, they aren't going to make the playoffs. So we are looking at them to either trade for Jacob Markstrom or John Gibson. Both of those guys, now John Gibson is a little older. Both of them are a little older at this point. But you go out and you add them to your team. They both are kind of they're both really solid when they're on. Now they're both prone to bad games, but it's an upgrade in net from what they have, and it's not just a small upgrade; it's a major upgrade, and it's something that, as a fan of hockey, I've been wanting the Devils to get for a while. Another goalie. It'd be interesting to see if it happens. I don't know if it will, honestly. I think it's going to take a lot to get Jacob Markstrom, and I think it's going to take a lot to get John Gibson simply because of how big that contract is. Someone's going to have to eat a lot of salary, and if it's going to be the Ducks, then you're going to have to give up a lot to get him, because it is a lot of money to pay a guy not on your team. So it is going to be tough, but if they can get that, I think they can make a push for the playoffs. And if you can get a guy like John Gibson, who has term left on him, you might be able to, not just for this year, but next year, make a couple deep runs. The other big story, the other team that I'm looking at, the big team that I'm looking at to make a move, is going to be the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers started off the season as one of the worst teams in the league. They fired their head coach, and then they went on the tied longest win streak in NHL history. I believe it was 18 or 17 games, and that went through January and February. Got snapped just a little while ago, but now they're comfortably in the playoffs. You have a guy like Connor McDavid, who we talked about is one of the greatest players, again, of all time in the league. He is a special talent. It's hard to describe just how good he is on the ice. If you have to watch him, what he does is so special. Everything he does is so special on the ice. So we're looking at that. We're looking at building around him. If you are the Oilers, you need to, and they might be one of the hotter teams in hockey right now. But in the playoffs, what really matters, I mean, it's a different game. You know, in every sport, the playoffs is a different game than the regular season. In the NHL, aside from goaltending, the biggest obstacle to succeeding in the playoffs is depth scoring. You can win a lot of games with a great top line, a great top six. you look at the Washington Capitals. They for all those years with Alex Ovechkin and Nicholas Backstrom, uh, they could never break through. You look at a team like the Maple Leafs, who can still never break through with a guy like Austin Matthews. They never had the depth scoring. Now the one year that the Caps won, they had really good depth. So depth is a huge factor in the NHL playoffs. So you go take a look at these guys. There's some people out there. Jordan Eberle, again, some depth scoring, some depth forwards is what we're targeting. Max Pacioretty from the Caps, a guy who hasn't played that much, but has the ability to be a really, really nice bottom six winger, providing some offense. And then Kubiak as well. There's some people out there on expiring contracts, on teams that might be selling, that can really provide a nice little piece off the bench for depth scoring. You talk about, again, depth is one of the most important things in hockey. And we talked about the Flames. They have a lot of guys over there. Executives believe that they're the key. They're going to control the speed of this deadline. They're going to be the one that makes the first domino fall, whether it be Jacob Markstrom or whether it be like last year with Elias Lindholm, or whether it be Tanev or Hanifin. The Flames seem like they're in the middle of all of these, and they are seemingly the hinge that's going to open up the door to what might be a crazy trade deadline in the NHL. Like I said, we have a lot of time. We're going to keep an eye on this. The trade deadline is on March 8th. There's a lot of time to make these big runs, to decide if you are a seller or a buyer at the deadline. There's still time for these teams like the Devils, like the Flames, to decide that, depending on how this next week or so goes. So, in our next segment, we are going to move into the NBA. There's an article on ESPN talking about the explosion of scoring and what that meant for the league, what these players think, if it's a good or a bad thing. I'll give you my thoughts. We'll go through that article a little bit together. But stick around. I appreciate everybody so much for tuning in. We will be right back.